Don't scrape it, don't spray it, and don't cut that orchid leaf yet. Those tiny bumps under the leaf may look like scale insects, insect eggs, or the beginning of a disease, but some of them are actually made by the leaf itself. That is why the first question is not, what should I spray? The first question is, what am I actually looking at? By the end of this video, you will have a simple way to sort these strange bumps into 3 decisions. Leave them alone, adjust the way you water and manage the environment, or isolate the orchid while you investigate further. And the clue I check first is not the color of the bump. It is whether that bump is sitting on the leaf or is truly part of the leaf. Start with a calm inspection. Hold the leaf so you can see the bump from the side, not only from straight above. If you can, compare the top and underside of the same area. Does the surface of the leaf rise smoothly into the bump, as though the tissue itself has swollen? Or does the object seem to sit on top of the surface, like a separate shell, crust, or body? Do not dig at it with a blade. Do not squeeze it hard. You are trying to collect clues, not create a wound. A magnifying glass or the zoom function on your phone can help, but even without one, that simple side view can send the diagnosis in 2 very different directions. Something attached to the surface makes me think about pests or residue. Something formed within the leaf makes me think more about physiological injury, old damage, or a lesion developing in the tissue. But do not stop after this first test, because old edema and old physical damage can become surprisingly similar. The next thing I want you to notice is time. Ask yourself whether the mark is new, whether it has changed since you first noticed it, and whether similar marks are appearing elsewhere. If you are not sure, take a clear photograph today. Photograph the same area again later under similar light. One picture tells you what the spot looks like. A second picture tells you what the spot is doing. That difference is powerful. A dry, firm mark that stays the same for a long period is a very different problem from tissue that is enlarging, softening, darkening, or spreading into healthy green leaf. This idea, stable versus changing, will keep coming back, because appearance alone can be misleading. In fact, one of the ugliest looking marks in this entire list may require almost no intervention at all. Now let's get to the cause that creates some of the most convincing fake bugs on orchid leaves. Edema. You may also see the British spelling, edema. Edema is not an insect, and it is not something sitting on the surface. It is a physiological response inside the plant. In simple terms, the roots take up water faster than the leaves can lose that water. The pressure inside certain cells increases, the cells swell, and blister-like areas can form in the leaf tissue. On orchids, those fresh areas can look raised, glassy, translucent, pale, or simply swollen. Depending on the leaf and the age of the damage, they can be much easier to see from the underside. And when you first discover a cluster of tiny raised spots, it is completely understandable to wonder whether something has laid eggs on your plant. Here is the important part. Reducing edema to the sentence, "you overwatered," is too simple to be useful. The problem is not only the amount of water that went into the pot, it is the relationship between how quickly the roots absorb water and how quickly the leaves can release it through transpiration. That relationship changes with temperature, humidity, air movement, the moisture held in the potting medium, the time of day you water, and the condition of the root system. A plant watered on a warm day may continue taking up water as the environment becomes cooler and more humid later. In cool, damp conditions, the leaves may lose water more slowly. If the root zone is still very wet at the same time, the imbalance can favor edema. This is why the same watering habit that caused no obvious problem during one part of the year can produce blisters when the weather or indoor environment changes. So, should you simply water less? Not necessarily. This is where many growers make the second mistake. They hear that edema involves excess water in the tissues, and they respond by leaving the orchid dry for much longer than it needs. That can trade one problem for another. A Phalaenopsis with healthy roots still needs an appropriate wet-dry cycle. The goal is not to dehydrate the orchid. The goal is to improve the balance. That may mean watering earlier in the day, letting the potting medium approach the appropriate level of dryness before watering again. Improving gentle air movement, avoiding a constantly saturated root zone, and paying attention when nights become cooler or the room stays unusually humid. Think better timing and better drying, not punish the plant with drought. There is another detail that makes edema confusing. The blister can change as it ages. A fresh swelling may look translucent or slightly water-filled. Later, the damaged area can become tan or brown, rougher, harder, and cork-like. At that stage, it may no longer resemble a fresh blister at all. It can look like a scab, a crust, or even scale. The plant is essentially leaving a scar where those cells were damaged. Once that scar is there, the goal is not to make the old tissue turn perfectly green again. You are looking for something more useful. No new blisters forming, the existing marks staying dry and stable, and the rest of the leaf remaining healthy. And this is where many growers accidentally turn a harmless old scar into a fresh injury by scratching at it. If you see a corky bump and you cannot tell whether it is edema or an insect, return to the first test. Look at how it connects to the leaf. Is the rough area continuous with the leaf tissue? Does it feel like the surface itself has changed, rather than like a separate object sitting on top? Then look for a pattern. Are several marks embedded in the same area of tissue, especially where earlier blisters may have been? Or are there separate shield-like objects scattered along leaves, stems, flower spikes, or protected crevices? The answer matters, because a real pest can give you clues that a physiological blister simply cannot. There is one more way to make the edema check more useful. Do not judge the bump in isolation, judge the pattern around it. Fresh edema often appears as more than one small blister in an area rather than as a single armored-looking object. The surface may look as though tiny portions of the leaf have lifted from within. If you gently change the angle of the light, the raised tissue can become easier to see because the contour of the leaf changes with it. That is different from seeing a separate insect body casting its own little outline on top of an otherwise flat leaf. Also, look at the rest of the plant before blaming the watering can. If the orchid has firm leaves, active roots, and no new damage except a few stable corky marks, you may be looking at an old event rather than a current emergency. If new blisters continue to appear after cool, humid periods, or while the medium remains wet for a long time, the environmental connection becomes more meaningful. This is why keeping a simple mental note of when you watered and what the room felt like can be more useful than reaching immediately for a chemical. The leaf is giving you a clue about the whole growing system, and remember that edema can occur even when the owner feels very disciplined about watering. Indoor conditions can shift without an obvious change in your routine. A sunny week can become a cloudy week. A heater or air conditioner can change airflow. A window can become much cooler at night. Sphagnum can remain wet longer than expected after it begins to compact, while bark can dry differently as it ages. The practical lesson is to respond to the plant and the pot you have today, not to a fixed schedule that worked 3 months ago. Before we go to pests, there is a second reason for bumps and rough patches that is much less dramatic: old physical damage. Orchid leaves last a long time, and during that time they can be rubbed against a shelf, pinched during transport, pressed against another pot, bent, scraped, or damaged when the plant is handled. A small injury can heal with thickened, discolored, or rough tissue. Weeks or months later, you may notice the scar and have no memory of the original event. The temptation is to treat the scar as a current disease, but the leaf may simply be carrying a record of something that already happened. This is why I care so much about texture and change. Old mechanical damage is often dry and firm. The edges may be clearly defined. The tissue around it can look normal. Most importantly, it does not keep advancing into healthy tissue. If the spot looks exactly the same when you compare photographs over time, that stability is reassuring. An ugly mark can be the least urgent thing on the plant if it is old, dry, firm, and no longer changing. Do not remove an otherwise useful green leaf simply because it has a cosmetic scar. Green leaf area is still valuable to the orchid, and cutting creates a new wound. Monitor first. Intervene only when the evidence gives you a reason. Now we move into the category that can change the decision from watch it to check the rest of your collection too, insects. Scale is the classic lookalike because adult scale insects can appear as small brown, tan, whitish, or yellowish raised coverings attached to the plant. Some are so still that they barely look alive. On an orchid leaf, a small dome or shell can easily be mistaken for corked edema, especially in a quick glance. This is where you need to inspect more than 1 square inch of leaf. Look along both surfaces of the leaves. Check where leaves meet the stem. Inspect flower spikes, old sheaths, tight crevices, and nearby orchids. Are there multiple similar objects in protected places? Do any appear to be separate from the leaf, rather than a deformation of the leaf itself? Is there sticky honeydew or sooty residue nearby? Do you see pale crawlers or other signs of insect activity? One isolated, permanent bump that is clearly part of the leaf is a very different pattern from repeated scale-like objects appearing across several plant surfaces. And if you do find convincing evidence of a pest, that is when isolation becomes sensible. Move the orchid away from the rest of the collection while you confirm the pest and choose an appropriate control method. Notice what I did not say. I did not say to spray every suspicious bump just in case. Unnecessary treatment can damage leaves, especially if a product is used incorrectly or on a sensitive orchid. It can also distract you from the real problem. First, identify the pest as well as you reasonably can. Read and follow the product label if treatment is needed, and remember that repeated inspection is often part of control, because scale can hide in places that are easy to miss. If your plant has only one strange raised mark and no other pest evidence, keep investigating before declaring an infestation. Mealybugs can also create confusion for beginners, although they usually look more cottony or waxy than edema. They tend to hide in leaf axils, under sheaths, around roots, or pot edges, and other protected spaces. The larger lesson is that pests have a life and a distribution. They do not arise as a swelling that is seamlessly built into the leaf. They can show up in multiple locations, leave feeding-related symptoms or residue, and spread to other plants. Edema cannot crawl to the next orchid. That sounds obvious when I say it, but when you are staring at a tiny bump through a phone camera, remembering the difference between part of the plant and organism on the plant is extremely useful. When pests are the possibility, use the same evidence-first approach. Inspect the orchid under good light and rotate the pot rather than looking only at the front. Check the newest and oldest leaves, the undersides, the base of the plant, and the flower spike. If you own several orchids, look at the plants that were touching or sitting closest to it. A true infestation usually gives you a pattern that is larger than one mysterious bump. Finding that pattern is far more informative than attacking the first raised spot you see. If you isolate a suspicious orchid, keep your tools and handling habits in mind too. Do not move from a plant with an unknown pest or wet lesion directly to healthy orchids with the same uncleaned cutting tool. Avoid splashing water from the questionable plant onto its neighbors. These are simple precautions while you determine what you are dealing with. The same principle applies to lesions. A mark that remains dry and unchanged gives you time to observe. A mark that becomes softer, wetter looking, larger, or more extensive deserves faster attention. The speed of change is information. So is the condition of the surrounding tissue. Instead of asking only, "What color is this spot?" ask, "What has this spot done since yesterday, and what is happening immediately around it?" That question is much harder for a harmless old scar to imitate. Now let's talk about the category where I become more cautious, even if I do not see an insect. Suspicious lesions, especially lesions that look soft, water-soaked, or actively expanding. This is where diagnosis from a single photograph becomes risky. Some bacterial problems on orchids, including bacterial brown spot on Phalaenopsis, can begin as small, soft, water-soaked areas and enlarge as the tissue is damaged. Other diseases and injuries can also create spots, discoloration, or collapsed tissue. That is why I do not want you to hear water-soaked spot and automatically announce a bacterial infection. Instead, treat it as a warning clue that deserves closer observation and, if it is changing quickly, more caution. Use your senses carefully without damaging the plant. Is the area firm, or is it becoming soft? Is it raised like a blister, or is the tissue collapsing? Is the boundary staying fixed, or is discoloration moving outward? Has the mark changed significantly since your last photograph? Are nearby leaves developing new symptoms? These questions tell you more than the dramatic appearance of one spot. If a suspicious lesion is actively enlarging, or the tissue is soft and wet-looking, separating that orchid from healthy plants while you identify the cause is a reasonable precaution. Isolation is not a declaration that the orchid is doomed. It simply gives you time and space to diagnose a potentially contagious problem without exposing every plant around it. And this is an important place to avoid a common shortcut. Not every dark spot is bacterial, and not every leaf disease is fungal. Different pathogens require different management. An environmental injury can mimic disease. If you are dealing with rapidly progressing rot, extensive tissue collapse, or a valuable collection, getting a diagnosis from an experienced orchid grower, extension service, or plant diagnostic resource can save you from treating the wrong problem. The faster a lesion is changing, the less I rely on guesswork. Remember this line: one photograph tells you what the spot looks like. A second photograph tells you what the spot is doing. The fifth cause is environmental injury from excessive direct sun or heat. Sun damage does not always look like a neat brown circle. Depending on severity and timing, leaf tissue can bleach, yellow, develop pale tan areas, become brown or scarred, and eventually look very different from the first day the injury happened. Again, location is one of your best clues. Ask which side of the plant faced the brightest window. Did the mark appear on the surface most exposed to direct sun? Was the orchid recently moved closer to glass, outdoors, or into stronger seasonal light? Did a sudden, hot, bright period occur before you noticed the damage? A spot located exactly where intense light would strike the leaf tells a different story from a cluster of bumps hidden on the shaded underside. But location is not proof by itself. You still look at progression, texture, and the rest of the plant. If the tissue is already scorched, moving the orchid into darkness will not repair the dead area. The practical goal is to prevent additional damage by giving the orchid bright but appropriate light and avoiding sudden exposure to intense direct sun, especially through hot glass. Do not use sunburn as a reason to put a struggling orchid in a dim corner permanently. Phalaenopsis still needs useful light. It just does not need harsh exposure that overheats or burns the leaves. By now, you may notice something important. We have several problems that can leave marks, but only some of them are still active when you discover them. Edema can leave corky scars. Mechanical damage can leave scars. Sun injury can leave scars. That means the history written on an old leaf may be more complicated than the current health of the orchid. This is the point where the ugliest looking mark may actually need the least intervention. What matters is whether new damage is appearing and whether the current growing conditions are supporting the plant. That brings us back to water imbalance. But now I want to make this practical instead of repeating the definition of edema. If you suspect those raised blisters are physiological, inspect the entire watering environment. First, when do you water? If you routinely soak the orchid late in the day and the growing area becomes cooler at night, try shifting watering earlier so the plant and pot have more time to move toward a balanced state before the coolest period. Second, how long does the medium stay wet? Bark, sphagnum moss, pot size, root density, and airflow all change the drying rate. Do not water by the calendar alone, check the pot. With a clear Phalaenopsis pot, look at the roots and the moisture inside. Healthy roots can appear green when wet and become more silvery as they dry, although color is only one clue, and roots deeper in the pot may stay moist longer than the roots you can see near the surface. Feel the weight of the pot. Notice condensation. Learn how your particular medium behaves in your particular room. An orchid in loosely packed bark near moving air may dry very differently from the same size orchid packed tightly in moss. The right interval is determined by the plant, the pot, the medium, and the environment together. Third, think about humidity and air movement. High humidity can be helpful for orchids, but very humid, stagnant air slows drying and can keep leaf surfaces and media wet longer. Gentle air movement helps moderate that environment. I am not talking about blasting the orchid with a fan until it desiccates. I mean enough circulation that the growing space does not feel sealed and stagnant. Fourth, look at temperature changes. A warm afternoon followed by a cool night can change the balance of water movement through the plant. Seasonal changes matter indoors too, especially near windows. The care routine that worked in midsummer may need adjustment when nights become cooler. And fifth, inspect the roots before making a dramatic watering change. If roots are unhealthy, brown, mushy, hollow, or badly damaged, the plant has a different water problem than an orchid with a vigorous root system in an overly wet environment. Wrinkled leaves can occur when the plant is not getting enough usable water, even if the pot itself stays wet, because damaged roots cannot supply the leaves effectively. That is why symptoms must be interpreted together. A bump on a leaf is one clue, not the entire diagnosis. Here is the retention question I want you to carry into the final part. If an old scar is still visible after the original problem is gone, how do you know when to stop treating the mark? The answer is healing tissue and corking. Plants do not erase every injury. They often seal and reinforce damaged areas. In orchids, an edema blister that has aged can become corky. A mechanical injury can also leave tougher scar tissue. That scar may stay with the leaf for the rest of the leaf's life. It can be tan, brown, rough, slightly raised, or visually unattractive, but that does not automatically make it active disease. The key is context. Is the scar dry? Is it firm? Has it remained the same size and shape? Is the surrounding tissue green and stable? Are new leaves developing normally? Are there no new bumps appearing? If those answers are reassuring, the plant may simply be carrying evidence of a past event. Do not chase cosmetic perfection by peeling, scraping, cutting, or repeatedly applying chemicals to old scar tissue. Your job is to grow the next leaf well, not force the old leaf to forget its history. At this point, we have covered all 7 causes, so let's quickly expose 5 mistakes that can turn a small diagnostic question into a bigger problem. Mistake 1 is assuming every raised brown spot is scale. Look for the pattern and for evidence that the object is actually on the plant surface. Mistake 2 is scratching or cutting before you know what you are touching. That can create an entry wound and destroy useful clues. Mistake 3 is spraying pesticide, just in case. Treat confirmed or strongly supported pest problems, not anxiety. Mistake 4 is responding to edema by severely dehydrating the orchid. Improve the wet-dry balance instead. Mistake 5 is removing a healthy green leaf because an old scar looks ugly. If the tissue is stable and the leaf is still functioning, cosmetic damage alone is not a good reason to create a fresh wound. Now we can finally make the decision that this entire video has been building toward. I want you to picture 3 boxes. Leave it, adjust watering, and isolate. You do not need to memorize 7 diagnoses if you can make a good first decision. The first box is leave it. This is where I place old, dry, firm, stable scars when there is no evidence of insects and no sign that the lesion is advancing. That may include old mechanical damage, healed corky areas, or old edema scars. Leave it does not mean ignore the plant forever. It means monitor instead of treating. Take a photograph if you want a reference. Continue normal good care. Watch the next leaves. If nothing changes, restraint was probably more useful than intervention. The second box is adjust watering and environment. This is where raised blister-like tissue fits when the pattern points toward edema or another water balance issue rather than a pest. Review when you water, how wet the medium remains, how cool the nights are, how humid and stagnant the growing area becomes, and whether gentle air movement can improve drying. Make changes gradually. The goal is not to starve the plant of water, it is to avoid conditions where roots are taking up water rapidly while the leaves are losing it too slowly. Then judge success by what happens next. Old scars may remain. What you want is healthy new growth and fewer or no new edema blisters. The third box is isolate. This is where I place an orchid when I have convincing signs of scale, mealybugs, or another pest. or when a suspicious lesion is soft, water-soaked, rapidly changing, or expanding, and I have not yet identified the cause. Isolation buys you diagnostic time. Keep the plant separated enough that leaves, flowers, tools, splashing water, and pests are less likely to move the problem to neighboring orchids. Inspect nearby plants too. Then identify the specific issue as carefully as possible before choosing treatment. Isolation is caution, not panic. There will be cases that do not fit perfectly into one box on the first day. That is normal. Plant diagnosis is often about collecting evidence. If a mark is strange but completely stable and the orchid otherwise looks healthy, monitoring can reveal more than aggressive treatment. If it changes quickly, that new information raises the level of concern. If you find actual pests elsewhere on the same plant, the diagnosis shifts. If you discover the bumps appeared after a change to cool, humid conditions while the root zone stayed wet, edema becomes more plausible. Let the evidence change your decision. So before you touch that strange bump again, run through this order. Is it sitting on the leaf, or is it part of the leaf tissue? Is it fresh or old? Is it dry and firm, or soft and water-soaked? Is it stable, or is it spreading? Where is it located on the sun-facing surface, hidden underneath, or tucked into places where pests like to hide? What changed in the orchid's environment before the mark appeared? And what is the rest of the plant telling you through its roots, leaves, and new growth? The most important skill here is not memorizing 7 names. It is learning to ask the right questions before you treat the plant. A frightening-looking bump can be an old scar. A tiny blister can be a sign that the water balance needs adjustment. A barely moving scale insect can be the clue that tells you to protect the rest of your collection. Look first, compare, watch for change, and then choose. Leave it, adjust your care, or isolate. If this helped you understand what your orchid leaf is telling you, thank you for watching. Subscribe for more practical orchid care. Give the video a like if it was useful. And tell me in the comments what your bumps look like and where they appeared on the plant.